Hello, welcome to another tutorial video. This time we're going to be looking at the charge of the Light Brigade. So we start off looking at structure, and we've got everything split into different stanzas as little episodes or snippets of what's going on. So we start off with the men, what they were told to do, and then we're told about how brave they were about going into it. Then we're told about the dangers they faced. Then we're going to be told about, or then we are told about the little victory they had, the mini victory. Then we're told about the retreat or the return that was doomed as well, and then we're told to honor them. So we've got these little snippets focusing on different things, and that's really useful because it allows us to concentrate individually on each thing and take the most, or should I say take as much as we can from each stanza. Then we've got the rhyme all the way through, which is irregular, but it really helps build a rhythm and pace, and stops and starts at different times. So here we have onward, 100, said, obviously the D there is what I'm looking at, and the 100. And here we have brigade, dismayed, blundered, reply, why, die, and then 100. So again, it's quite irregular, but all the way through it builds its own pace. It's very rhythmic, like it makes you ebb and flow with it as it goes, which gives us the idea of them, charging, and someone dropping off dying, and then charging, and someone dropping off dying, etc, etc, etc. We've got the refrain, which adds huge emphasis. A lot of the stanzas end with this, but then it changes slightly. So the emphasis here is rode the 600, rode the 600, rode the 600, not the 600. So when that changes, the fact that that refrain has just changed there is really powerful, because it allows us to think about the numbers, and now that number is no longer one whole unit, even though the rest of the time we're always talking about the whole unit. We don't get to hear how many died, we just know in this that some people died, but we still remember them all with the same respect, those that lived and those that died, etc. And the last structural point here we've got is the other voice that's actually come in. We've got it: forward the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said, forward the Light Brigade. And that's both those kind of calls, and the fact that they're actually one's a repetition of part of the other, just allows to show how ill thought out this was, and how there wasn't a wider range of understanding or parameters actually put into it. It's just forward. That was the only thing they were given, forward. It wasn't looking at the situation and tactically working out what would be best. It was just forward and charge. Charging there basically means going forward as well. So really we just got this repeated idea, which obviously Tennyson's commenting to us was moronic for this battle in particular, but that doesn't take anything away from the soldiers, from the men. So what meanings do we get from it? What themes do we get from it? The idea of bravery comes through very, very strong. Was there a man dismayed? No, because they were brave and they knew what they had to do. And as they went across, they flashed their sabres bare, they attacked with swords, and they were really going about trying to do the best that they could in the given situation. And the fact that all the world wondered, this is taken in two ways, and one of them is to do with the bravery, is to just marvel at how these men just rode into certain death, as we put it, the valley of death, to actually try and win the war, win this battle for their side. We've also got the idea of foolish commands in, as I mentioned earlier, the repetition, or the similar repetition that we get, or the similar feel we say we should get from this, and also that someone had blundered, the idea that someone had made a mistake in telling them what to do, whoever the he here is. And this is just given as a he rather than someone specific, because this poem doesn't just refer to the incidents here, but in a wider sense to all bad commands with wars. And if you link this to some of the World War I poetry that you've actually come across in this, and probably at other times in your reading, you'll know trench warfare and how that was just a complete and utter instant waste of life. Here we have the idea of reputations, and the reputation here is positive. That first of all we have the poem in and of itself, and it's called The Charge of the Light Brigade, which is in itself a very the word in it, the charge of the brigade. They're very powerful and very uplifting. They were trying to do something positive in terms of the war with what they were doing, and the reputation is extended as they plunge into the smoke and they broke through the line, and then they need to be honoured. That's mentioned several times. So that reputation that they actually have is very, very important. And the honour that we actually get from them doesn't for them, or we're supposed to feel for them, or isn't just from the repetition of honour, but we also get that from the fact that they're called noble, the fact that the world wonders about them and how they've actually gone about this, and how they were just so willing to do and die. And that's very important in their honour. We have to respect them and honour them because they were willing to go to the extremes to try and win this battle. We move on then to images, and one that comes across very slowly is the cannons and just the tactical arrangement of this battlefield. It's to the right of them, to the left of them, in front of them, and then on their return it's to the right of them, to the left of them, behind them. And this gives us a very encompassing sense, and the images of guns and gunfire from all sides at all times, when they were going in and when they were coming out. So even this strike that they actually managed to make, it wasn't enough to do anything here. When they broke the line and they made this strike here, it wasn't enough to actually make a lasting impression or a lasting damage on the enemy, because then they were still shot to bits on the way back. We've got the language here, the metaphor of the guns volleying and thundering and storming. So the onomatopoeia there is really powerful because it gives us a real sense of how tumultuous being in the middle of that would have been. And moreover, the metaphor of this power of nature shows what they were up against. Something, because no one can really stop thunder from striking or stop a storm from storming. And in using these words, Tennyson makes it clear to us that these men had very little opportunity of coming out of here alive, because it was something so powerful that they were facing. The religious imagery that I wanted to pick up on was here, where we have the Valley of Death mentioned, and also the reference to hell. They're coming out of the mouth of hell. And the mouth of hell in some texts is actually guarded by creatures. In some places it's a monster, in some references it's a kind of angel, a version of an angel, which basically allows people in or out. And in the return of the 600, we see that some people have been allowed to leave and some people haven't. And I think that's important because they've gone into the mouth of hell and some of them have died. I think that's why he uses it here, to give us that religious sense, and obviously the sense that comes with death, etc. And he's writing this in a time when the country would have been far more religious than it is now. So people would have adhered to this imagery in a far more striking way than perhaps we do. The idea here of the Valley of Death is taken from the Bible, and the capital D on death there is in reference to death, the personified as the Grim Reaper who's hanging out here to take people's lives. We've also got the image of breaking the line, and I think this is stark because what's said about them here, there's not to make a reply, there's not a reason why, there's but to do and die. And that section there is talking about their bravery, but we only see it in this moment here, and it's very powerful. They break through just for momentarily. They flashed all their sabres bare. The flash there is the idea of light and goodness and the righteousness. Flashed again as they turned in the air, sabring the gunners there, charging an army while all the world wondered, and they plunged. So there's this sabring, charging, plunging. It's just the idea of them being heroic and doing all the right things and being, I want to say manly, but that's a bit sexist, but just being very aggressive and just being how you'd want your soldiers and your army to be, just really fighting through. And then they broke through the line, and the enemy reeled from every swing, and they were shattered and sundered. Like rent asunder basically means broken into bits. But that might be a slight over-exaggeration, because they're not shattered, they're not broken to bits, because the gunfire comes from all the same positions as it did earlier. So whatever this effect this has had actually a small effect, but it's put in the most glorious way. So the image that Tennyson wants us to take from this is of this really heroic effort, but ultimately it makes very little difference, because they're under exactly the same pressures before and after, and it doesn't make an ultimate difference, or at least in this part of the poem. And that's why we get the idea here of I've put doom, glory, doom, because they're doomed before they get there, and they've got this small bit of glory, and then they're doomed again. And that's interestingly put, because it shows the futility and the morality of this command. In the language, then, we've got repetition all the way through, and you're just going to talk about how that adds emphasis, and you're also going to talk about how it links us back to other parts of the poem, so that we can really understand the plight. The force of nature and the elements mentioned there. Sorry, I mentioned that a little earlier on anyway. We've got the alliteration when we've got where was a W and W, this, the world wondered, and that's really powerful, because it allows us to think about how vast that is. It makes it stand out and think about the entire world wondering about it. And ironically, this battle was made famous by this poem, so the world does wonder at it indeed, because of the poem, perhaps more than just their bravery, which is a testimony to poetry, but a testimony as well to the power of the writing here, and how it really can be linked and taken and drawn upon for so many wars and battles that have occurred. And we've got a lot of language. I think I've mentioned this already. A lot of language that's heroic and deserving. Theirs was but to do and die. Noble 600 a little later on. They fought so well. Here they're called heroes, etc. So all that type of language is all very positive, showing how they're heroic, and or honouring them obviously shows how they're deserving, etc. So what effect does this have on us? Well, it reminds us of courage of soldiers, and trying to fight even in the most improbable of situations. It allows us to feel for the soldiers, given bad commands, but how they didn't disrespect or disobey. They still went off into the charge. And it allows us to consider, or invites us to consider, commands that are given. Are these from the men best placed to do this? Or should we be allowed perhaps to, or should soldiers be allowed perhaps to not follow through on something? But then obviously that opens up whole other preambulations. But you can just think about all those different elements. I hope that was useful.